So the one takeaway here is, and I guess the reason we wanted to look at this video, is that you see characters. Each of those dogs, an individual. That is the key right there. They're not perfect, they're not sanitary, they're not normal in any way. Two of them are in the background not being very appropriate. Another one's vomiting in the middle of the trail. They're squiggly. I got one with 3 legs. They are each individuals. And my job as a team leader is to bring these individuals together and try to create something that at the right point in time is ready to compete and ready to take on a huge challenge. Now, I've been racing sled dogs pretty much my entire life. Mr. Dixon here, Dr. Dixon. We don't have the opportunity to say that too much in our line of work. You already kind of delineated some of our accomplishments recently. I've been racing dogs my whole life. This is what we grew up in, and it is my passion. And I've been fortunate enough in the past few years to see real success in this. We won the Iditarod in 2012, became the youngest person ever to do so. At the time, I was 25 years old, just barely. I turned 25 the day before the Iditarod started. At that point, the 20-year average for an Iditarod champion was 42 years old. I was 17 years younger than what an Iditarod champion was supposed to be. And in this unique sport, it's not necessarily about the most athletic or most physical dog driver. It's about being the best coach. You would never look at an NFL coach and say, oh, that guy's hitting 40, he's done. No, that's when they begin being a good coach. So it's a real challenge to set off and try to accomplish those goals. 2014, I set the record for the fastest Iditarod time ever. We did it in 8 days, 13 hours, and some odd minutes. And that was a huge leap forward. That beat the previous record by more than 5 hours. And that's the record. That previous record was almost 5 hours faster than the record before that. We were looking at something like 10 hours faster than what you would consider an extremely fast race or almost a guaranteed win. 2015, we won the Iditarod in, again, a very fast time. This was the second fastest win of all time. In 8 days, 18 hours, and had the ride of a lifetime. So what is the Iditarod? Well, we're a little ways away from Alaska right here. I think we're something like 3,300 miles. And just to put that into perspective, I've run, I guess in my lifetime, I've run that distance more than 16 times by dog sled. So that's a lot of hours we spent on the back of a dog sled. But the Iditarod is the longest sled dog race in the world. It travels over 1,000 miles across Alaska. Again, put that into perspective. From here, 1,000 miles and 1,090 miles or so puts us at the Florida border. That's what we do by dog team. The Iditarod was first run in 1973 in an effort to keep sled dogs alive in Alaska. Sled dogs were quickly disappearing with the arrival of snow machines and airplanes that were taking over the transportation business in the state. My grandfather, along with about 30 other adventurous mushers, set off to cover the historic Iditarod Trail, a trail system that had been used for the previous about 75 years to provide supplies to all the mining towns across the state of Alaska. When they set off to go all the way from Anchorage to the far northwest coast of Alaska in the city of Nome, it was unknown whether or not a single dog team could travel that entire distance. It really was an expedition. My grandfather finished that first race in 3rd place. He kind of started a family legacy or a family business along with actually helping to start the Iditarod race itself. My dad was 14 years old when that first Iditarod ran, and he got hooked pretty bad. He decided that he was going to be a sled dog racer, and by the time he was, I guess my dad's always been old in my eyes, but he must have been about 30 years old when he started his kennel and took on racing the Iditarod seriously, and I was about 5 years old at the time. That's the environment that I grew up in. Now, the Iditarod starts in downtown Anchorage. It's the largest population mass in the state, with about 300,000 of the 600,000 people the state has. 300,000 of them live in Anchorage, which in my mind, what that means is it leaves the entire rest of the state to me. There's not a lot of population out there. This start picture here is in Willow. The race restarts once we get out of the city limits, where it's safe for the teams to take off. There's a lot of hubbub, a lot of excitement, and down the trail we go. But as soon as you make it about 20 miles out of the starting line, things begin to thin out. Now you are out in Alaska. Once you leave the starting line, there's not another road for the rest of the 1,000 miles. Every single checkpoint we visit along the way has to be supplied by airplanes, snow machines, or dog teams. The dog teams run day and night. It is up to the dog driver or the musher to decide when we need to stop our teams and how long we need to stop the teams. This is not mandated by the race. That means there's a lot of room for adjustment, a lot of room for creativity for each driver to drive the team that they think is best. When we do stop and camp a team, this is pretty much the environment we're going to be living in. We're outside almost the entire time. There's no outside assistance either. So any care that's given to the dogs has to be given to the dogs by the musher. If you want to, where should we start on that? There's a whole list of things you got to do out there, but anything you have to do with these dogs, whether it's bedding them down, feeding them, any repairs to your sled or equipment, or preparing for the next run, all has to be done by the driver, him or herself. The terrain we cover out there is very varied. This is a pretty normal wind-blown river. This is a place where you have very little traction and you rely heavily on your lead dogs to navigate you around the stumps and obstacles. Other places we're crossing over the Alaska Range. This is a pretty famous section of Alaska. It includes Mount McKinley or Denali, depending on your preference there, and stretches all the way down, kind of working its way southwest across the state. We cross it at Rainy Pass, and you're immediately followed, after climbing the mountain for pretty much all day, you reach the top, and after you've been walking and pushing your sled for hours on end, now you look down at the famous Dalzell Gorge. It's pretty much a luge run of rocks and obstacles and open water and creeks and rivers. So right as you accomplish one obstacle or one task, you're immediately confronted with another. Once you get towards the end of the race, you're looking at the Bering Sea coast. This is just literally miles and miles and miles of jumbled ice and white. There are trail markers along the way. You can see right behind my dog sled in this picture, there's a small lath stick. It's kind of like a surveyor stake. These are placed every 100 yards to a mile, depending on the terrain. Hopefully, when you're out on the Bering Sea, you're going to see these stakes every 100 yards. That way, if a storm kicks up, you still have something to follow. Generally speaking, there's supposed to be a trail for us to follow. In reality, there usually isn't. And this is something that throws a lot of mushers. They get out there and they expect something to be there for them. And when that gets taken away, it leaves them with a lot of panic and a lot of fear. You have to be out there and look at these trail markers as an added benefit, something to help us if it's there. If it's not, don't worry about it. We'll find our way yet. But the dog driver is responsible for all of these things. Now, when I was 5 years old, I had this image in my mind about what it would be like to win the Iditarod, to actually win that 1,000-mile race that my dad had been striving to win. My grandpa had come so close. He was third and he was fifth, and I think he later was somewhere in the neighborhood of 52nd. But he was 75 years old for that race, so I guess he had a pretty good excuse on that one. But he got close. He was always competitive. My dad was always right in the top, but for many years that victory eluded him. So when I was 5 years old, I had this image of what it would be like to win the Iditarod. And yes, at 5, I knew that was my goal. And there are a few kind of iconic images around that, one of which is driving that dog team down Front Street, the crowds of people. Oftentimes, we'll see as many as 3,000 people in downtown Nome there to watch the finish of the race. The town only has 3,000 people, so most of them are imports that come up there to watch the race. The other iconic image is the musher sitting there with his lead dogs, draped in the yellow roses. This is what I envisioned winning the Iditarod would be. In reality, it was something a little bit different. Winning the Iditarod is not crossing the finish line first. That is a result. That is a result of doing all the other things that cause that victory to come to pass. And those are the things that we focus on 365 days out of the year to position ourselves to realize that effect. We do the things that are the cause to realize the effect. So in a normal day on the Iditarod, we run. After all, this race is about traveling. Generally, we'll run for somewhere between 6 to 8 hours depending on trail conditions. Some of our longer runs might be 10 or 12 hours long. How many people here have been on let's say a 10-hour flight in an airplane? You guys travel, all right. How miserable was it? Did you fly first class? I guess that might change your perception on it. But that's a long time to sit there. And most of that time, you're probably watching a movie or trying to fall asleep or reading a book or just relaxing. You're not really worrying about getting to your destination. That's the pilot's job. But here, on a 10-hour run, you are staying in one place. You're trapped by this cold, literally. You have ice half an inch or an eighth of an inch from your face. If you move in the least bit, that ice now makes contact with your skin. You may feel that ice slowly freezing against one side of your face where the wind is coming from one particular side and it's just freezing and it's packing snow in. But to move and try to clear that out is going to knock a whole bunch more snow down your collar. So you just sit there and grin and bear it for hours on end. This picture is in the morning. Mushers look forward to the morning. We run, again, day and night. So you spend hour upon hour freezing through the night, waiting for that first ray of sun to kind of pop over the horizon. And even once you see the sun, you know it's going to take another 2 or 3 hours for the heat to start kind of warming you and your team up a little bit. And by the time it starts to warm you up, it's already setting again. So first of all, we run, we travel, and we observe. We watch our team. We know what to do when we reach the checkpoint. We know how to care for our dogs because we've been observing them every step of the way. A lot of people ask us, don't you get bored standing on the sled for 10 hours at a time or 6 or 7 hours even? Not really, because when I'm standing there, I'm kind of scanning the team. I'm going down from dog to dog, analyzing their gait, watching them move, and making sure everything is normal from their perspective. Once we reach a checkpoint, we have to feed our dogs. Food is fuel. This race is honestly more about feeding dogs than running or even resting dogs. When we decide to stop and rest the team, it's honestly based more on putting calories into the dogs than it is about actually letting them sleep. The sled dogs are burning between 12 to 14,000 calories every single day on the Iditarod. This is, on average, a 55-pound athlete. What is the average calorie burning for a human? I mean, let's say 2,000 calories for a normal, that's probably not your Olympic-grade swimmer, of course, but we have a dog a third of our size burning something like 5 or 6 times as many calories as we do in a normal day. One of the miracles of the sled dog is their ability to consume food, turn that food into energy, and then turn around and run down the trail. So feeding your team is actually one of the biggest keys. So knowing what to feed your team and when to feed your team are huge strategy points for a dog driver. Once you get the dog's food prepared, which is quite the operation, generally when I cook for my dogs, I'm going to mix it all in that big cooler we just saw in this last frame here. We got a cooler, not to keep the food cool. You can see the steam rolling out of it there. It's to try to keep everything thawed long enough to get it into a form the dogs can actually eat. So we're going to melt snow to boiling water, add it in the cooler along with the meat, fat, usually beef or poultry fat blends, their dog food, which is a specially formulated dog food for racing dogs. As you saw in the video, we buy that, I guess in fairness, we buy it in bulk. If you consider 21 tons at a time bulk. We do that to try to get the price somewhere somewhat reasonable for a person. If you were to buy this food 1 bag at a time, it'd be about $72 for a 40-pound bag of dog food. So you have to buy it in uber bulk to be able to make it somewhat affordable. But mixing the food for your dogs is a huge key point. This last year, I had a reporter following me on the Iditarod right there in my face. I got headbutted by about 15 different cameras in the race because they get right in your face every single time, and you look up and they crack you in the nose. But their question was, what are you putting in this food? Because I sat there for about 15 minutes mixing and mixing and mixing and adding this ingredient, that ingredient, the other ingredient. And it was everything from seal oil and seal blubber to this specially formulated dog food to beef to chicken to everything I knew the dogs would need for their next run. But then the key is that they actually eat it. Sometimes we go through a lot of effort to prepare the food for the dogs, and the dogs kind of look at it and tuck their head back in and go to sleep. This is what a dog team is supposed to look like when they're eating food. You want your team to be strong enough, well-rested enough, not overexerted to the point that they don't want to eat. So first of all, when you're running your team, the key is not to wear them down to where they're really tired and they're going to really use this next rest. The key is never to bring them to that point where they're going to get tired. I want to keep my team well enough rested that eating is always a higher priority than sleeping. So after a 10-hour run, which is a pretty long run, they need to be more interested in eating food when they get to that checkpoint than curling up and going to sleep. And that's important later on because this is one of the things we identified by looking at the race from the dog's point of view and saying, what is the highest priority from our dog's perspective? Next is massage time. One of the key things is not necessarily that you fix every problem for the dogs, but that they know you are aware. For these dogs, I am their segue to the whole outside world. They have no way to pick up a cell phone or go online and look up healthcare. That's not one of the things they're capable of doing. They can't really even communicate when there's a certain problem to a random passerby. I am the one person in the world that is their connection to health, to food, to security, and everything else. And if I am not fully fulfilling that position, that leaves them with questions or doubts. And even though I know what's going on, even though I know what the delay for, let's say, the food coming to the table for them is, if I know, okay, I'm waiting for the hot water to melt so that we can feed them, They don't necessarily know that. So they need to know that I know. So in this example here, this is a dog named Crazy, the one I'm working on. She's not exactly crazy, but I don't know how she got that name. Anyway, Crazy is famous for thinking she has a problem. She pretty much never actually has a problem, but she thinks she has a problem. She's a character. This dog will run to the moon and back and have no real problem. She never got tired. It may be because she wasn't exactly the hardest worker in the world, but at the time, I wasn't in a position to be very picky about which employees I had. This was my team, and I had to work with them. So the biggest key to making Crazy successful in the race was not fixing her phantom problems, but the key was letting her know that I knew about them. And that gave her the security she needed to curl up and go to sleep and say, okay, the boss knows, and if the boss knows, and he's not concerned, then I shouldn't be concerned. And that's a position of trust that it takes time to develop in these dogs. Once the dogs are sleeping and I've got them all massaged and kind of patted down, we do a little aerobic exercise with the dogs each time. Well, that's the wrong word for it, but a stretch pretty much after each run, where I extend each arm, compress each shoulder, flex the wrists, kind of feel down all the legs and forearms, making sure there's no hot spots indicating a sore or swollen muscle. When the dogs are running, we're constantly analyzing their gaits to see if there's even the slightest change in the dog's gait or a different gait in this particular condition than those dogs generally use. And obviously you have to have past information to make that decision. If I notice a dog is loping at 9 miles an hour on a nice hard packed trail, when this particular dog generally trots at that speed, that's an indication that there's something going on, that muscles are beginning to break down or the dog's beginning to get tired. A trot, where the dog's front legs move independently of each other, usually the front right leg is going to move in unison with the hind left leg. They both will extend forward, then the other two go. That is the most common gait the dogs are going to use. But when they start loping, what they can be doing is hiding something from you. When they lope, both front feet extend, both hind feet extend. When they do that, they can catch all their weight on one front leg or the other one, thereby protecting one side. So if they're beginning to get a sore muscle on their front right shoulder, for example, they might start loping and catch all their weight on the left side, which they can do that for a short distance, and then eventually the left side is going to get tired. So our job is to identify these problems before they really advance to a real problem. I can fix a minorly sore muscle. I cannot fix an injury. These are the things that I have time to fix or not to fix. So once we get the dogs all patted down and resting, they're going to sleep for a couple hours, but now it's my time to get prepared for the next run. Once I get everything prepared, it's nap time for me. Generally, we're going to crash on the straw right next to the dogs. I do have a sleeping bag. This last year as I did it, I took my sleeping bag out, I think 4 times. I stopped, I think 19 times over the course of the race. Some places there's a checkpoint to go inside and just lay on the floor. Sometimes you just crash on top of the straw. Sometimes, like this year when we saw temperatures of 46 and 50 below many times, you actually get your sleeping bag out because you need it. After about a 15 to 20 minute rest, we're going to get back up and start preparing the team for the next run. The dogs are going to sleep generally 8 to 10 hours each day on the Iditarod. The musher is going to sleep probably 2 30 to 40 minute naps. So we're looking at an hour to an hour and 20 minutes of rest each day for the mushers. This is the real endurance part of this race. Now on the Iditarod, we face a lot of challenges out there. This is the famous Dalzell Gorge going down the far side of the Alaska Range. There's open water. To accomplish this trail, to survive and thrive on this trail, you have to have a team that's working as a team, that's communicating. That is a very, very large factor here. Here's a team that's not exactly communicating. You got your lead dogs, one of them, actually, looking at this slide, the dog that's in front isn't actually the lead dog in this picture. The lead dog's back in the middle of the team here. But that guy, the one with the one booty on, he actually is going the correct way. You got dogs halfway through the team, they think they need to keep going down the river rather than hitting the bank. Now, I'm not even sure which way the musher's trying to go in this particular instance, but I do know in these conditions, we can't exactly just stop and steer the dogs, because he's on glare ice, and the dog team, especially when they're all pulling in the same direction, is very, very hard to stop. So you have to rely on your lead dogs to take those commands. If they don't hit the right turn, let's go back for a second, you could be going into that water hole rather than around it. These two slides are not more than about 100 yards apart, honestly. So you have that situation where the dogs have to communicate with the leader. They have to know who is the leader. Right now they're following a dog in the middle of the team, which is better than following nobody, but that dog doesn't exactly have the communication with the musher. There's a reason the musher put the lead dog in lead. This is not a good situation if you're a dog driver. If you have a team working all in the same direction, you can accomplish some pretty amazing stuff. This picture here was one that I got when I was my brother took this picture of me. We're going up an avalanche chute, which, just as a sidebar, it's not recommended. My dad almost killed me when he saw this picture. We're traveling up a mountain, up an avalanche chute, and eventually we got to a point where I had to lift each dog over my head, set them on the trail, because there was about a 6-foot gap between where the avalanche wiped everything out and the trail. This is the type of stuff you can do. I have seen it been done. I have done this stuff. This is something that my grandfather was famous for, was training the best lead dogs and the best teams in the world. So it's something that we had the exposure to know it was possible. And that has always been my pursuit. My greatest passion in training sled dogs has been training lead dogs. Lead dogs that have so much trust in their driver that they will do absolutely anything for you. Sometimes the leader falls down on the job, huh? We don't always have great snow out there. 2014 was a race plagued with just frozen dirt. We did hundreds of miles of this stuff. Our equipment is not designed to operate on dirt, but yet we end up on dirt quite a bit. And this is not soft like garden dirt. This is rock solid frozen dirt. The dogs here are not stopping. That's how sled dogs are. They're going to keep on rocking down the trail, whether you're upright, upside down, sideways, it doesn't really matter. They got their job, they're going to do it. But there are some ways that it's acceptable for the mushers to fall down on the job. Like here, like we were saying, the dogs really don't care if the musher's on his side or not. But there are things they do care about. And there are probably the most specific, I guess, would be when you're traveling down the trail, there's a certain connection or a bond or a trust that's absolutely 100% important out there. The dogs have to have faith in their driver. They have to have faith that you have their best interest in mind. So long as you never break that trust, you can get away with a lot of other minor errors. But as soon as you break that trust, as soon as they have that question mark in their mind, wondering, does my leader really have my best interest in mind? Then you're going to have some problems. Again, communication is the key to navigation. At least these guys here, the lead dogs, are going whichever way the leader has directed them to go, or at very least, the leader is pretending like that's the direction he wanted them to go, and he's sitting there pretty content along the way. We have a lot of storms up in the northern part of the state, especially in March, which is when the Iditarod runs. Bering Sea storms are the things that really honestly test an Iditarod musher and the communication with their team. Now again, here's a perfect example of a dog team that does not trust their musher. We have a little trickle of water, and you see the dogs right behind the musher have their all 4 paws absolutely dug in. They're not going 1 more inch. Even though it appears to be a pretty small situation, but at 50 below, water is a pretty big problem out there. But it's regardless. The dogs don't trust their leader. And this image, this is actually my dad, 2013 Iditarod. Unfortunately, the cameramen had all left by the time I got there. Yes, my dad did beat me in that race. But his lead dogs approached this water that's clearly a lot deeper, and he told them, let's go straight across. And they believed him. And sure enough, the team goes straight across, and a massive river that's open up here is not a big deal. But if you go back here, a little trickle, when they don't trust you, is a very big deal. Now your musher has completely soaking wet feet because of a little trickle that's not more than 4 inches deep. Here, my dad is trying his best to keep his feet above the water. I think he did fail minorly in that goal, but still there's a certain amount of pride when you can drive a dog team across open water like that. Now again, I grew up in a dog yard with 100 sled dogs. This is my yard up in Willow. It's a lot cleaner when you have snow out there. That video was in spring, and I hate spring in Alaska. I guess you guys probably got a taste of that this year, huh? A pretty significant winter. I think you guys outstripped us by a long shot when it came to winter this year. Now, I've always had a bit of a knack for understanding what sled dogs are thinking. And part of it is, before I ever started training sled dogs, I was trained by sled dogs. This is actually my daughter here. That's Ursus. Ursus is, well, she has 11 sons that were born over the course of 18 months. All 11 of those puppies are now semi-adults. They're between 2 and 4 years old. All 11 of them ran the Iditarod last year. That's a pretty good percentage when you're looking at dogs racing at that very, very highest level of competition. So she is one of the matriarchs of our kennel. And not only does she raise our puppies, she also raises our daughter. When I grew up in a very similar fashion. You know, I'd be out taking care of dogs, and I took so many naps in dog houses that I've lost count. My job was to pull all the straw out of the dog's house and give them fresh bedding. Because before you can ever train a dog, you have to learn how to care for them. They have to know from that very earliest phase that we're here to take care of them. And when we're doing that, sometimes you get tired in those warm dog houses, and when you only weigh 75 pounds at 12 years old, it's pretty easy to curl up in a dog house, have the dog come in as well, and you get a nice nap in the middle of the workday. You guys don't know what that's about, do you? Like I said, 12 years old, that's what we did. We trained and raced sled dogs. That was our purpose in life. Here I'm doing the glorious job, and as you can see, I'm pretty proud of it, of grinding seal blubber. Seal blubber is nasty stuff, I'm not going to lie. It's even worse, the stuff that ends up being fed to the dogs. Dogs absolutely love it. I smelled like a seal most of my childhood. When I was 18, I ran my first Iditarod, and it was a very huge learning experience. These were my first competitive races when I was about 16 to 18 years old. When I was 16 years old, I ran my first pro race, a 300-mile race kind of out west in Alaska. My dad and I each went out to this race. He took the varsity squad, the top 14 dogs. I took the JV squad. We went out there and with a well-prepared team. That was the key at this point, was build a big team, prepare a monstrous dog team, and then go race in the races. We went out there and did a 300-mile race, and I raced. I was good at understanding dogs. I had grown up in the dog houses. I had been raised by dogs. I was like Mowgli. Anybody watch Jungle Book? I love that movie, partially because it's the only video we had on VHS. We never had a TV growing up. I was homeschooled all the way through high school. All right, I'll be honest here. I wasn't homeschooled, I was just home. But anyway, so I ran my first pro race, and I finished fourth by 1 minute. Another musher beat me for third place by 1 minute, a $3,000 difference in purse. I was 16. I beat, 13 mushers in that race. Either had already or in the next 3 years became top 5 finishers in the Iditarod, an extremely competitive race. I beat my dad in the varsity squad by 20 minutes. I finished with a 5-dog team, which was the smallest team you could legally finish the race with. And how races work, if you get a dog that's sore or tired, you can leave them behind at any checkpoint. Or the most common reason a dog is left behind at a checkpoint is they do great, they get to the checkpoint, but then sleeping was a higher priority than eating, and they curl up to sleep. And without consuming the necessary food, they're not allowed to or able to continue running down the trail. And at the time, I thought this was the perfect race. We built a big team, we went to the race, we raced really hard, we finished with 0 fuel. I ran the last 20 miles of that race in front of the sled, actually pulling with the dogs. I gained a reputation in that race for being one of the hardest working mushers on the trail. It didn't hurt that at that point I had just won nationals in Olympic style wrestling. I became the first Alaskan to do so. I was in good shape. And like I said, I beat my dad in the varsity squad by 20 minutes. At this point, in racing and in my mind, and I'd say racing as a whole, the entire sport, this was viewed as the perfect race. Finishing with 0 fuel left in the tank. Knowing your team well enough to know exactly how much fuel and how hard you could push and still be able to reach the finish line. But there's some problems with that style. All right, so this down here, this is, I guess, the best image I could find for this. But you see this team here, and this is not a 5-dog team, but this is a team racing in that style, where a lot of the dogs, like look at the dog in the middle of that team, the one by himself, the light-colored one. This guy here is putting more pressure on the neckline than pulling on the tug line. This dog is not really helping the team. And when you race dogs in this style of racing the Iditarod, what ends up happening is the dogs take matters into their own hands, or paws as the case may be, and they're going to decide that if we're going to push this hard, I'm going to decide when I feel like pulling and when I don't feel like pulling, because you're setting too high of a bar for a lot of these athletes. Now in 2009, my wife and I decided to start racing the Iditarod competitively. Sounds pretty normal, right? I'd grown up racing. I had been in the sport my entire life. My family had been doing it, 3 generations, yada, yada, yada. The only problem was, in fall of 2008, my wife and I did not own property. We did not own a single sled dog. I did not own a sled. I did not own one harness. I did not own a single item of mushing paraphernalia. So when we decided to start racing the Iditarod competitively, this was a pretty major undertaking. I was able to secure one sponsor for $50,000. That effectively was our entire budget for operation. All right, still, that's not unreasonable to run the Iditarod on a $50,000 budget. That's actually a pretty good budget if you just want to finish the race and you already have everything. You already have a kennel. But we set yet a higher goal. I wanted to become the youngest person ever to win the Iditarod, which gave us only 4 years, or 4 Iditarods. We will operate on more of a fiscal calendar here. We gave us 4 Iditarods to accomplish that goal. So the dogs that I was able to procure for that 2009 Iditarod were later kindly referred to as the Scrubs. They were the biggest mixed match group of dogs you could possibly imagine. I had everybody from Guinness weighing in at about a whopping 37 pounds soaking wet, all the way up to Cessna hitting more about 70 to 75 pounds. We had huge variation in our team. We also had one consistent trait in our team, and that was every single dog on my team had failed in another kennel, in another normal training regimen. Every dog that comes up for sale is a dog that had effectively failed in that operation. It's like, kind of like getting fired, I guess. But from the dogs I view, fortunately, they don't see it that way. In my mind, the best thing you can do for a dog is make sure they're working a place that they're working well at. In my kennel, we sell a few dogs. We raise and train and race a lot more of them, and we obviously have a long retirement plan. If they're in our kennel, we're responsible for them for the entire life of that dog. If we do sell a dog, our standard is it has to be one of the top 5 dogs in the kennel that's buying it. That way, we know that that dog is going to be a success where it ends up. So who we sell dogs to is far more important than how much we sell dogs for. Anyway, in acquiring this team, we were able to get an entire team of dogs for about $17,000, which is pretty nominally priced. I bought a lot of them from my dad. He was more than happy to kind of get some of those dogs out of his kennel. They're a bit of a liability. We leased dogs from different places. We had every possible style. And again, the only consistent factor in these dogs is they'd all proven that they couldn't hang with the big boys. They couldn't race at that top level. So the first thing that I did is I went through the team and tried to figure out what has caused each of these dogs to fail in the past. We tried to look at it from their eyes. And what we saw is that doing the longer runs, the big long trips, the big hard pushes are the things that brought out the weaknesses in these dogs. Racing at my dad's level, where most of them had been, they had been expected to do 70 to 80 mile runs, recuperate in maybe 5 to 6 hours, and then get back on the trail again. We knocked it back to a sustainable pace. We brought it down and had to rebuild the dog's confidence. That was one of the hugest factors here. And we never did a run more than 40 miles. We set that as a standard. We wanted these dogs to know that every time we took off, as long as I was on the back of the sled, their new musher, we were going to do something that they were capable of. We set small goals to begin with. We also set a shorter rest time at 4 hours, and we did that 4-hour rest every single time. Every time we pulled into a checkpoint, the dogs knew what to expect. They knew what was going to come in the next couple hours. We started doing this routine, and we started focusing on building a sustainable training and racing style that wasn't about kind of playing on the dog's super athleticism qualities, because these dogs weren't the super athletes. These were the ones that had proven they couldn't hang. But we built a system that was based around their strengths, which was, at the end of the day, if you set a sustainable pace, they were still a sled dog, and they could still do it day after day after day after day out there. Long story short, we brought this team together, completely revamped their training and racing style, rather than focusing on setting a very high level of operation and hiring employees at $100 an hour to be able to operate at that high level, and then putting them in an environment where this is the standard, you either do it or get out. We set it up to say, this is the group we have to work with. How are we going to set them up to succeed in this environment? And we changed the rules a little bit for them. And we took the budget dog team out there, and we ended up finishing the Iditarod in 6th place, which was phenomenal, honestly. Our goals were in the top 20. What we realized was once we got on the Iditarod and raced at a sustainable pace the entire way, because I was more concerned about finishing the race than trying to be competitive, the dog team continued to build and excel. And we saw greater speed in the team. Speed is our equivalent of income, by the way. We saw greater speed in the team because they knew what to expect. Each run they got up, and they weren't afraid of this being a run that was above their level. They knew what the run was going to be. They knew that I would stop before it was too long of a distance for them. In the checkpoints, they rested and ate and recuperated far more effectively because they knew our routine. And like many people, if we set our alarm clock at 6 a.m. every morning, we generally end up waking at 5:59, right? You know when that alarm's going to go off. Again, by building in that normal and consistent 4-hour stop, the dogs would pop up, well rested and ready to rock and roll after that break. The routine was huge for these guys, and it paid off with huge dividends. My dad, racing his $250,000+ dog team that he's been honing for some 20+ years now, finished only 30 minutes ahead of us. And it definitely caught his attention, and he started reassessing how he was training and racing dogs. My realization was that our previous thought on racing dogs, the idea that a race was about going out there, building up the team, and then starting the race and pushing as hard as you can, was not the best way to do it. You could sustain a team. You could build a team over the course of the race. And we started working on this kind of theory of building a positive spiral, doing runs or workouts within the dog's capability level to where they were ready to eat and recuperate well when we stopped. After having a good rest and a good meal, they were ready to run at a higher level next time. After that next run was accomplished successfully, they again ate well. We started building this positive spiral where each success built on the previous success, rather than the negative spiral that most mushers had been operating on, where they would do a big challenging run, and the best 75% of the athletes in the team would eat well, the other 25% would be suffering or struggling, then they would usually get left behind because they just couldn't hold the pace. And then again, the dogs would be a little bit weaker on the next run, and it would appear to be a bigger challenge to them because they hadn't recuperated well. So the focus became around building that positive spiral in the team. Now, in 2012, after having continued to work on the same theory, I guess, for the past 3 years, we set off on our final chance to become the youngest person ever to win the Iditarod. The previous year, I had finished in 4th place, but I was about 6 hours behind the winning team. My team was still entirely comprised of dogs we had purchased from other kennels. And again, our budget was pretty limited. So we were picking up dogs wherever we could, and there was a few key traits that I was looking for. And the most important trait to me was not size, it wasn't even their gait, it wasn't their hair coat, it wasn't their design or anything like that. It was mental. I can work with a dog that's willing to work. First and foremost is that my team has to want to work for me. So far we've talked about what we can do for the team, and that's really important. But secondly, the team has to be able to go out there and get the job done. And there are times when you have to realize that it's time to cut a dog loose. It's time to let a player go because they're not benefiting the team as a whole. So we set a high standard, and fortunately with sled dogs, they absolutely love their job. It's bred into them to run and pull and travel. So getting dogs that want to go is pretty easily done. And again, it's setting the dogs up to succeed and putting them in a situation where athletically what we're asking them to do is well within their means. We started out the Iditarod in 2012, continuing this theory and developing the dogs on the race, and focusing on only racing the dogs for maybe the final 200 to 300 miles of the race. But prior to that, building the team. And ultimately, you have to forget about your competition. Because when you're on the Iditarod, the best chance you have of winning the race is getting to the finish line as quickly as possible. And that seems like a really, really simple statement right there, right? I mean, you get there quick, you win, potentially. But it's amazing how many people miss that point. Because in a race, what do we start doing? We start racing our competition. We start looking at our competition and what are they doing? Oh, he's 6 hours ahead, he's 4 hours ahead. And you try to catch up with them. The leaders try to bolster their confidence by being on par or keeping up with their competition. We had to let go of a lot of that. And that is a difficult thing to do. You have to look at your team, because your team is the only team that you have control over on the Iditarod. I have no control over trying to win the race. The only thing that I have control over is building my team. And by building my team, the result is we will win the race. So in the 2012 Iditarod, it was pretty easy to do that for the first 700 miles. Because I was in the middle of the pack, I had confidence that we were setting a good pace. We were within striking distance. I knew that it was possible for us to win the Iditarod. Not likely by a long shot, but we set out on a style that would give us an opportunity, and that's the best thing I could do for that team, was put them in a position where there was a chance they could win. And we had to do things differently so that if the market turned our way, we'd be in position. But it did not give us the majority chance by any shot. The only problem came along about 300 miles into the Iditarod when our style was working so well that I was actually in the lead of the race at 300 miles to go rather than being in position to catch up with 300 miles to go. That had been our plan. And all of a sudden, things started looking different because now we were actually in the lead. And there's a lot of media attention. For the first time, people were looking at us and saying, what is Dallas going to do? And the standard was when a musher broke and actually got into the front, they tried to make a run for it as hard as they could and get as much distance between them and second place as possible. And usually in the process of making that big push, inevitably they would weaken their team. And then the whole pack would catch up again, and then somebody else would break and try to get way out in front. And again, they would falter, and the teams behind them would catch up. So we almost did that. And I remember it so clearly. I was coming into a checkpoint, and I was going to skip that checkpoint and go right to the next. It was actually my plan. It was the plan on my written schedule, was to kind of make these big moves and catch up with the front pack, because I'd anticipated being well behind. And I remember getting into a checkpoint, and it just kind of occurred to me, why in the world would I do that? Why would I change the one thing that's been working so well the entire way, only because that's how everybody before us had ever done it? But then again, if we were going to win the Iditarod, 17 years younger than the 20-year average, we were going to have to do some things a little bit differently. So that's when I decided, you know what, I honestly really don't care about winning the Iditarod, which is not true at all, by the way. But what I care about is building a team that is unstoppable. We're going to build a monster. We're going to see what's going to happen. I mean, heck, I'm 25 years old at this point. I have a huge, hopefully, a big, long career in front of us. The things we learn now can have so much impact 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road. So that was actually our decision at that point, is I'm going to build this team. I'm going to keep building them. We don't need to race these guys yet. And the result was, is we ended up playing a cat and mouse game with my other top competitor at that point, which was a lady named Allie Zirkle, one of the best dog drivers we've seen in many, many years. And she's kind of become our de facto rival. She's one of my best friends on the trail, but she came in second place 3 years in a row and was beat each of those years by either myself or my dad. So that kind of builds a rivalry when you do that. Anyway, we ended up playing a cat and mouse game all the way down the trail, where I would outrun her team by 40 or 50 minutes on a 40 to 50 mile run. And then we'd get to the checkpoint, and I would give that time, instead of taking that time and trying to get another 40 or 50 minutes ahead of her on the next run, I stayed right with her. I stayed there as long as I could and gave my dogs as much rest as I could. And then on the next run, we'd outrun her by 5 minutes more, and then 10 minutes more. And we kept reinvesting that energy and that effort the dogs gave me into rest. And what I realized in the process of this is the best way to become unstoppable on the Iditarod is have the unstoppable team. So long as you have the unstoppable team, who's going to beat you? I mean, that's the definition of an unstoppable team, right? Or I should say an unbeatable team. So the object of our race became about building that team. And sure enough, it became the more simple way for me. It became the more clear way. Because when you have a 4-hour lead on your competition, that's great. That's really, really awesome. It's so nice having a 4-hour lead. Except for, it's really disposable. The first big storm that comes along and stops the entire race, your lead can disappear that fast because of reasons out of your control. By building your team, you keep the power within your control. Now if a storm stops the race and I'm dead even with second place, but I have the stronger team, because instead of investing that energy into getting a lead, I invested it into getting a bigger team. Now in that same storm, a few things will happen. First of all, it's going to take a bigger storm to stop me than it will take my depleted opponent. When the storm starts to break, I'll be able to move sooner. Again, I can travel in worse conditions than my opponent can. I keep beating on that microphone. I'm going to move over here. Also, I can always travel faster. If I leave the final checkpoint dead even with my opponent, I'm going to beat him to the finish line by 40, 50 minutes. It keeps more things in my control. And this was another level that we began to learn. As a leader on these teams, I wanted to take responsibility for absolutely everything. Call me a control freak, but I wanted to control everything I possibly could. Because as soon as we gave something up, let it out of our control, we become less of a leader. Because we don't have the ability to affect the outcome. So if I'm going to get a lead, okay, that's great, but now I've handed off some control. I've weakened my team, which I hate doing, and I've handed control off to Mother Nature, which is always a scary thing to do. So in the 2012 race, we finally crossed the finish line, became victorious, and accomplished our goal of becoming the youngest person to ever win the Iditarod. But what I felt was the bigger accomplishment in that was the learning. I guess the learning curve of sorts that we went through, and the realizations, actually having the opportunity to race in the front of this race and realizing that our opponents were still just humans and canines, and they had to play by the same rules we did. We weren't any different than them, even though we were much younger and much less experienced. And the experience we gained on this race was crucial. This is my team leaving one of the final checkpoints. And I've been looking at dogs my entire life. And what I see here is 2 lead dogs that are ready to set an example. This team is just just got done with the rest. Many of the dogs are still bedded down there. A lot of times, I go through, wake everybody up, and we kind of move them off the straw, let them go to the bathroom, let them stretch, and then we get moving. These two lead dogs, we got Diesel, I guess, is on your right, and Beetle on your left there. These two guys set the tempo, set the pace the entire way. When I said it was time to go, they stood up, leaned into the harness, and the entire team followed. Because those guys are the two oldest dogs in the team. And the way that they reacted to me, I guess I'm the leader, they're my managers would be a better term for them. The way they reacted to me and communicated with me and trusted me set the tempo for the entire rest of the team. Now, when we got out there in terrible conditions on the Iditarod, these dogs looked to their leader, or their manager, who looked to me, and we told them that we were in control of absolutely everything. And that's a crucial point. For all my races after that, I began to look for any possible area that we could take control of something that previously mushers had left to chance. Now, after the 2012 Iditarod, we were in a pretty good situation, right? We accomplished our goal. In just 4 years, we went from not owning a single piece of sled dog equipment, though I had spent a lifetime learning the sport. So I don't want to say I went in unprepared. I came from a very good situation. My grandfather had raced the Iditarod. My dad had raced the Iditarod. Both my older brothers have raced the Iditarod. My wife now has raced the Iditarod. We definitely knew what we were doing, but we were still starting from scratch. But when I started the 2013 Iditarod, it was a little bit different playing field. All of the dogs that had been in my team in 2012, with very few exceptions, had retired. It's one of the things when you buy dogs, they're usually not puppies. They're usually 4 to 5-year-old athletes that have tried out for other teams, didn't quite make the other teams, and then moved on to a less competitive team where they could then be a top performer. Well, in 2013, we saw a real changing of the guard. I had been developing a large kennel and a lot of young talent in my kennel over the past several years. In 2013, they were all starting to join the team as 2-year-olds, which is pretty young. Generally, a dog doesn't compete in the Iditarod until they're 3 years old at the competitive levels. But that wasn't a luxury we could afford. And this team here, I'm just looking at a couple of the dogs in here, and every one that you can see in this lineup on the left-hand side of the team is only 2 years old. They're pretty young guys there. So we went out on the 2013 Iditarod and quickly made a realization that we weren't going to repeat our win. That was not in the cards for us. And sometimes those are the hardest decisions you have to make as a leader, is going out there and realizing that my team is not capable of winning this race. It's a pretty tough approach to take. And having been a wrestler my whole life, you never go into a race or a competition thinking that you're beat. That's just not the right approach. But by the same token, we have to be realistic. We have to be honest, and we have to set honest expectations for the athletes we have in front of us. My team does not care one bit what my last name is. They don't care if I'm a Seavey, a Smith, a King. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter that I think I have a mushing legacy. These are young athletes, and all they know is what I show them. So what we decided on the 2013 Iditarod was, what are we going to show this team? These were effectively college athletes. I'm going to be racing this team for probably this next 6 years with new recruits coming in each year, and then eventually, as these dogs get a little bit older, there'll be a few retiring each year. So what am I going to teach this team now? What is most important to me to teach this 2-year-old team? And it was pretty simple. The most important thing to teach this team is that their leader will take care of them. They need to give me everything they can. That's what I expect of these dogs, is they will put it all on the line every single time. But with that comes the fair exchange of, I am never going to ask them to do something they cannot easily do, and I'm always going to take care of them in the process. We set out on the 2013 Iditarod with the goal of building a confident dog team and finishing the race as quickly as the team was capable of, because that had become my new goal, not winning the Iditarod. Finish the race as quick as the team is physically capable of doing in a happy, healthy manner, and build a monster. That was our motto here. The 2013 Iditarod, honestly, I feel was my biggest accomplishment until this last year, I guess, on the Iditarod. I feel like it was my most successful race. I finished in 4th place with a team of college athletes in the most competitive race in the world. And we finished that race with a very healthy, vibrant team. I had a small team because as we were proceeding down the trail, as soon as the dog showed me any weakness, the first thing I did was leave them behind. Now, from a human perspective, this might seem like something that's hard on their ego, except for dogs don't have ego. That's the great thing about them. Well, all they know is when we leave a checkpoint, I'm asking them to do something. What that something is, they have no idea. They don't know if the next checkpoint is 50 miles or 100 miles away. They don't know, they have no control over anything. All they can do is trust me and know that I will stop well within their means, and I will give them straw, and I will feed them, and I will massage them, and I will be aware of all their problems or ailments. And if I'm going to go through and I'm going to check each and every one of their little paws and put ointment on them, even if they don't need it, just to let them know that I'm in tune with what you have going on here. So I finished the race with a small, strong core of dogs that were the ones that were succeeding the entire way through. I taught these dogs that they could succeed, and that if they gave me everything they could and they were able to keep this pace for 600 miles, fantastic. That's all I need you to do. You've done your job. Thank you. I'm going to leave you here. We're going to train next year, and you're going to be able to make it 800 miles next year. So at the end of that race, it was a crucial moment there where I had an opportunity to beat Jeff King, who is a 4-time Iditarod champion and probably one of the most famous dog mushers, certainly of my era. He finished in 3rd place in that race. I had a much faster team than him, and I was gaining on him every single run. And there was a kind of a crucial moment in the race where we had the opportunity of doing one long, hard push, and I would have finished 3rd place in that race. And I decided then that I didn't really care about a 3rd place finish versus a 4th place finish. I'm going to stick to the plan and build the team. We stopped halfway through the run, made a nice long rest, and the dogs finished with great speed, great enthusiasm, and we were set up well for future years. The next year, the 2014 Iditarod, I'm sure you guys were all big mushing fans in 2014, right? You followed every step of it. 2014, we had no winter. It was a non-existent winter, which left the Alaska range absolutely brutal. No snow. We went down the side of a mountain on frozen dirt and ice. There were stumps about yay high that were usually covered with snow, that were absolutely 100% exposed and rock solid. We bounced off of every possible obstacle for the first 300 miles. Within the first 300 miles, we lost something like 20% of the field, dropped out of the race. Most of them, or many of them, either had broken human parts, legs, ankles, ribs, and arms seemed to be the main kind of recipient of all those injuries, and broken sleds that were not just cracked or fractured, but broken beyond repair. And also there's a few mushers that had simply broken mentally. That was definitely an aspect. But after that, we actually had an incredibly fast race. It was glazed ice on the trail, on the surface. So the dogs were able to run down the trail with almost no effort. I have always trained teams that are tough and capable. They can duke it out in whatever conditions we have. They have faith in their driver, and we love storms because of that. I also always hang back in the race because I'm building this monster. I'm building this strong team, and the plan is to catch up in the last 200 to 300 miles where that strength really shows. Except for in this race, we were operating in 5th gear the entire time. It was such an easy race as far as the dogs were concerned. There was no resistance that Jeff King and Ali Zirkle were running in 5th gear, which is their strength, and I was still running in 3rd gear, letting my dogs go at 9.5, 9 miles an hour, never more than that, because I don't like taking the risk of injuries. That's not something we do. We don't train at those speeds. I'm not going to let them race at that speed. So by the 700-mile mark in this race, I was 10 hours behind Ali Zirkle. It's not looking too promising. 10 hours is a lot of time to make up in only 300 miles. So for the last 300 miles of the race, I kept just doing what this team had done the year before, kept building them, kept letting them mature, and figured that this was going to be a 3rd place finish for us with those front runners so far in front of us. Sometimes it's just not your year. But I also kept kind of hoping and praying for any bad weather. Give us a couple inches of soft snow, something that will take those more depleted teams that are in front of me and give them some resistance. On a nice fast trail, even a tired team can maintain a fast pace. But as soon as you give them resistance, now it's a lot harder. You want to see a difference you will see a difference in a human runner. If they're completely exhausted, we can still go 8 or 9 miles an hour on a flat surface. But as soon as you get on a hill, they're done. As soon as you put them in sand, they're done. The same is true with sled dogs. So we kept hoping and praying for any bad weather, and we kept getting closer and closer to the finish line. It became clear we were not going to see any storms or any bad weather. Finally, we left the last checkpoint with only 75 miles to go to the finish line. By this point, I had closed the gap down to where I was, I think, only 2 and 3 hours behind 2nd and 1st place. And again, the forecast was for great weather. And it was great weather for about 15 miles. And then we had hurricane force winds picking up. It was absolutely terrifying. By the time we got 40 miles from Nome, we had gusts of 60 to 70 miles an hour kind of pushing from the mountains out towards the open sea ice. And on this stretch of the trail, we were literally clinging to a ribbon of beach that's between the mountains, then there's a lagoon, then there's a little beach, and then there was only about a quarter mile of frozen sea ice, and then black, open, Bering seawater. Usually, that sea is frozen as far as the eye can see. That was a lot of seas in there. But in this particular winter, with conditions being so warm, the sea ice had never frozen. Also, with the strong wind coming from inland, it pushed all the sea ice out to the ocean. There, we changed it up a bit. Anyway, so when we got out there on that ice, we were on glare ice with open water immediately to our left, and we're trying to work our way along. A gust of wind would come, completely lay us flat on our side, and the entire team and I would start skidding across the ice, heading towards the open water. Eventually, the dog's claws would catch a patch of snow, or I would be able to get our little ice hook that we used to hold the dog stopped and get it stuck into the ice, lead the team back into the storm, and continue working our way towards Nome. We did this for over 40 miles, one step at a time. I don't think there was a single time that I was able to make it for more than 100 or 200 yards in a 20-mile section because we'd simply get blown off our feet. There's certainly a time for big picture thinking. When we start a kennel, we have to look out, where are we going to be in 5 years? Where are we going to be in 10 years? What do I need to do now to have the team I want to have in 5 to 10 years? And then there's also a time for very, 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 very small picture thinking, like when you're getting blown out to the open sea. At any point in there, had I ever thought, we have 40 miles of this. I will be doing this for probably the next 7 hours. I don't think we would have made it. At very least, I would have doubted whether or not we would have made it. And the second that I doubted whether or not we would have made it, I can guarantee you my team would have picked up on that, and they would have found the first protected clump of snow to curl up on and go to sleep. Because as soon as I show any doubt or any weakness in this situation, they're going to reflect that. So what we did was took one step at a time. We never tried to make it 40 miles. We tried to make it 40 feet. That was our focus. We'd get blown over on our side. We'd skid out towards the open water. We'd get stopped. I talked to Beetle in a very calm, confident voice. Beetle, ready? G over. G is the command to turn right. He would swing into that wind. He would be leaning at a 45-degree angle, putting his nose into it, fighting a losing battle against that wind. There's times he was literally sliding backwards. I'd wait till the wind gust died down a little bit and say, all right, Beetle, let's go. And he would lean into it, and the entire team would follow him. At this point, I only had 7 dogs in my team, but that's the team I like. I want my small core group of proven athletes with me in the final miles. We would walk into that storm at a 45-degree angle until we hit that patch of ice that it was always a sled on those slick runners that would break free. And it would kind of spin sideways. It would pull the back dogs off balance, and the next one, then the next one, and the domino effect would happen, and the entire team would head back out towards the sea ice. We'd run into a clump of driftwood. And again, you'd wait till the gust died, because I'm not going to tell Beetle to do something he can't actually do. So sit here and wait for just 2 or 3 seconds, maybe 10 seconds. When the gust lets up, then we're back to the same thing. Beetle, ready? He'd swing into the storm. All right. We walked into it. We did this hour after hour after hour. There was no reason the dogs should have believed that we could have ever made it out of that thing. They had no idea if we would see a light 50 feet away. They had no idea if we would be 50 miles in this. I guess in that regard, I was the weak link in knowing how far it was to the next checkpoint. And the fact that they didn't know gave them some hope. Also, the fact that they knew I had never before asked them to do something that was above their ability gave them the ultimate confidence. We kept doing this hour after hour. Finally, I saw the lights of Nome within sight. This was a long-awaited view. I didn't care if I was in 3rd place. This was going to be a record-breaking race. I was going to do it in 8:13, 8:14, somewhere in there. I didn't know exactly how long it was going to take me. That's 8 days, 13 hours. I'm sorry, I've been doing mushing stats since I was this old, so I know exactly what an 8.7 or a 9.7 or a 9.10 race means the entire way through. And I saw the lights of Nome, and I started easing towards the town, and I told the dogs, you guys can do whatever you want. Let's just make it from this point. The storm had let up a little bit, and I started seeing a light behind me. And I figured that my dad, who at that point had been 4th place in the race, was catching up. So I said, all right, sorry, boys, we got to put one last push on. So we started heading towards the finish line. I had 1 2-year-old in my team still, a young guy named Reef, one of the best dogs I've ever had the privilege to drive. And when we went from just moseying on towards Nome and fighting through the storm, where he had performed fantastically, to trying to put in a little more speed to do that final race to the finish line, I started seeing him having a little bit of trouble. And a 2-year-old dog of this quality, I did not want them to know that they weren't Superman. You have to keep that secret. So I loaded in my sled, and I had 6 of my solid guys left on the ground, and we raced towards the finish line, put one last push on. We were able to hold a 2.5 minute lead, about a 1/3 of a mile lead over the person behind me, who I was sure was my dad. I crossed the finish line believing I was in third place and was going up the line patting all my dogs. A little dog named Glitter. She's 38 pounds. My big boy named Hero, he's 75 pounds. I still have that huge variation in my team in size, but they all have the same heart, and they've all been trained in the same way. These guys are rock stars, and I'm patting them on the head. And there's a cameraman that asked me the simple question, did you ever think you could do it? And it made me kind of wonder, do what? Of course I knew I was going to finish the race. It never crossed our mind that we wouldn't finish. We're a solid team. We go through storms. That's what we do. He says, dude, you just won the 2014 Iditarod. I'm looking at him and say, what do you mean? Where's Jeff and Allie? They were 2 and 3 hours ahead of me. It's like, they didn't make it. I'm thinking now, like, what do you mean they didn't make it? Did they get blown out to the open sea? And do these guys even know what's going on? In Nome, it wasn't even that windy. The last mountain we had crested over put us into a good area and not much wind. I was seriously concerned for a second. And then he told me, went on and the whole story unfolded. Allie Zirkle had stopped at a shelter cabin with 20 miles to go. Her team was done after that storm. They had made it to that point, but could not continue on. And the biggest part was she didn't have confidence in her team. The leader did not have faith in their team that they could make it. And I can guarantee you that the dogs picked up on that and started acting in a way to preserve their own selves. And she then saw the way they were performing, and there you create your negative spiral. The team sees the leader sees the team, and pretty soon things fall apart. Jeff King, again, one of the most famous mushers in the race has ever seen, honestly. He's been called the most winningest musher ever. And he has probably actually deserved that title and earned that title, even though he gave it to himself. But I've had fun racing him over the years, I can guarantee you that. We've got a really good race record against him as well. Anyway, his team finally, honestly just didn't have faith in their driver. And they got blown over at one point, and they found a nice spot behind a chunk of driftwood, and they were not willing to get up again. And they said, we're staying right here until these conditions improve. And those are the teams that we're racing against. And that is simply the difference of a team that has faith in their leader and a team that doesn't. The interesting thing is my lead dog, Beetle, I got to go back to find Beetle here. The black dog there, I bought him from Jeff King. You know who Jeff King's main lead dog was? A dog named Skeeter. We named dogs in kind of themes for the litter. This was the insect leader. So litter. We had Beetle, Skeeter, Bumble, Cricket, and a couple others. The interesting thing is Jeff King's main lead dog and my main lead dog were litter mates. Same exact genetics. I had bought Beetle because Jeff thought that Skeeter was the better dog. He sold Beetle to me. Jeff was racing Beetle's sister. I had him. The only thing that was different between these two teams was the experiences they had had and their trust in their leader. And that was the difference of a team who makes it through a storm and a team that goes from being sure that he was going to win his 5th Iditarod to not reaching the finish line. It's simply the experience in the training and the trust in their leader there. Now, there we were, 2014. Now the little orange dog here, I just got to point him out. On the right-hand side, this is Reef. He was the 2-year-old that rode for the last about 5-6 miles of the race in the sled. But again, he did everything I asked him to do. I asked him to run, he ran. As soon as I saw there was any weakness, I picked him up and put him on the sled. I asked him not to run. He did what I asked him to do every step of the way. He did not fail. He did exactly what I asked him to do. It's just I had to change my mind partway through and use the most recent information. Now that same dog, this past year in 2015, led me to the 2nd fastest Iditarod win ever. As a 3-year-old, he's 3 years old, has won the Iditarod twice, and has no lost confidence in his driver because even when the team powers through the storm, individual athletes need to be accommodated for. You have to make sure to set them up to succeed in there. The 2015 Iditarod honestly ran away, or the 2015 team ran away with the Iditarod. We had no real competition. Our plan was to go 700 miles into the race, build a monster in the process, and see who there is to race. And by 700 miles into the race, we weren't physically in the front of the race yet, but we had no real competition. My competitors kept drawing debts. They kept pushing the team harder to hold on to an artificial lead. That is to say, if you're going to sprint to the halfway mark on a marathon, you're going to beat me there, but you're not going to beat me to the finish line. We kept our eye on the ultimate goal. There's a lot of partway awards along the Iditarod. First to the halfway, first to the Yukon River, first to the Bering Sea coast. I won none of them, and I don't want to ever win any of them. That is not our goal. Do not get distracted by the $3,000 worth of gold nuggets at the halfway checkpoint. I'll let Aaron Burmeister race to get that one. And then he'll finish 3rd in the Iditarod, and I'll take the lead. The only time you have to be in the front of a race is at the finish line. So many people race in a manner that they believe, it appears that they believe that the winner is the person in lead for the longest. No, the winner is the person in lead at the finish line. There's literally about a 3-foot section of the trail that I need to be in lead, and that's at the very, very end of the race. So to wrap it all up, it has become my goal not to win the Iditarod. It has become my goal to build an unstoppable dog team and watch them do their thing, and watch them on the race, and watch them crush the competition. It's really quite fun. And winning the Iditarod has become an effect of the things that we do. And one of the biggest steps that I've learned in the most recent years is to take control of absolutely everything. And we touched on this briefly earlier. For example, is it bad luck if your dog team gets sick on the Iditarod Trail? Yeah, I guess so. I mean, you bring over 1,000 sled dogs together at the start of the Iditarod, dogs that train in isolation. There's a lot of bugs and flus out there. 99.9% of Iditarod mushers believe that their dog teams getting ill on the race is a result of luck. I think I was one of the first, and probably still one of the only teams, that takes full responsibility and builds our style of racing around accommodating for that weakness or that problem. We take responsibility for that by not putting the dogs in a situation that they could get sick, by running the dogs in a reasonable pace to where they're not depleted. Right now, if I'm almost positive that anybody in this room jumped up and ran 20 miles as hard as they could, and let's say 30 degrees and rain, you would probably get sick afterwards. But yet, mushers on the Iditarod Trail oftentimes forget that we do have control over more than we think we do. In fact, we have control over everything we choose to have control over. Bad weather. I honestly can't control the storm, but I can build a dog team that can excel in that storm. We take responsibility for as much as we possibly can. We bring it under our control. And if we can't literally control it, we control the aspects that will defend against it. In bad weather, we're not going to control the weather, but we will build a team that can accomplish that. My team sees that. We are able to accomplish everything. We never get to a situation and say, oh no, what do we do now? Because we have prepared a team to handle that situation. And as leaders, you have to take responsibility for everything that may or may not affect you or your team. My dogs have no idea what I control and what I don't. Dogs don't know if I'm absolutely magical. From my dog's perspective, do I control the weather? They honestly don't know. All they know is the situations I put them into. So they know under his leadership, we got into a storm and we were not able to go through it. So first of all, what is a storm? 10-mile-an-hour wind, 20-mile-an-hour wind, 60-mile-an-hour wind? It's all relative. It's all relative to the strength of the team. So my dogs know that I'm in control of absolutely everything. And they're happy with that. And again, when you're leading people, because I do have about a 12-person human crew that puts us in a position to be able to compete in the Iditarod. When we're leading people, they have to believe that I'm in control of absolutely everything. And for all intents and purposes, I do have to be in control of everything that will affect them or prepare them to deal with those situations. All right, I've never been one to be short on words. So I think I've touched on most all the topics I have to talk to you guys about. Honestly, again, I try to take everything I do with a grain of salt. I am a dog musher. I live in Alaska. I have a whole bunch of dogs. I literally live in a tent. I don't know if you saw it in the video. We live in a yurt. It is essentially a glorified tent. You guys are doctors. So I hope you can take some of the things that we said here and put it into perspective. And if nothing else, take it for an entertaining story along the way. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to come here and talk to you guys. And I would love to take any questions if you have any. And thank you very much.